My brother called me broke at the Thanksgiving table. In front of my mom. In front of my aunties. In front of every cousin who was old enough to understand what was being said. And my mom laughed. So I put my fork down, took a sip of water, and I ended the whole conversation with 4 sentences. This is that story. Let me tell you about my brother Andre real quick because you need the full picture. Andre is 4 years older than me. And growing up, Andre was the guy. Not in a made-up, family hype kind of way, genuinely, the guy. Varsity everything. Popular. Funny. The kind of dude who walked into a room and the energy shifted. My dad used to call him the one with the motor. Like he came off the assembly line with something extra in him. And he did. I'm not going to take that from him. But Andre has this thing, and I say this with real love because he's my brother and I love him, where he needs the scoreboard to be in his favor at all times. It's not enough for Andre to be winning. He needs you to know he's winning. And if someone around him starts looking like they might be catching up, or worse, pulling ahead, Andre gets competitive. But not in a clean, honest, let's go way. In this sideways, low-key, I'm just playing kind of way. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The guys who roast you, but it's not a roast. It's a real opinion dressed up in a punchline so they can pull the bro "why are you so sensitive" card the second you push back. That's Andre. I love him, but that's Andre. I moved to a different city 3 years ago to start my own thing, a freelance digital marketing consulting business. For 2 solid years it was rough. Like, genuinely rough. Ramen and calculating your checking account before you buy groceries rough. I'm not sugarcoating it. There were months where I was negotiating with myself about which bill got paid on time and which one got a voicemail. Andre knew about the hard stretch. The whole family did. And in true family fashion, instead of just leaving it alone, they built a whole narrative around it. I was the one who took a risk, and it didn't pan out. I was still finding his footing. I was the cautionary tale. And Andre, at every holiday, every cookout, every birthday dinner, never missed a chance to poke at it. Always with the smirk. Always in front of people. Always wrapped in a joke. You still doing the marketing stuff, bro? You actually eating off that? How's the city treating you? I can cash app you something if you need. Nah, he's out here being an entrepreneur. Said like the word entrepreneur was a polite way of saying unemployed. Every single time. Like clockwork. And my mom, God, I love my mom, but she has this laugh. This specific, airy, boys will be boys laugh she does when she doesn't want to choose sides, but is absolutely choosing sides. Every time Andre made one of his little comments about my situation, my mom would do the laugh. Wave her hand. Move on. Like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. But I kept my mouth shut. Holiday after holiday, I swallowed it. I deflected with a smile. I told myself, just keep building. When the numbers get to a certain place, the jokes stop on their own. Just keep your head down. Let the work speak. And then this Thanksgiving came. Here's what nobody at that table knew. Over the past 18 months, my consulting business had started moving in a way I hadn't even fully processed yet. I'd landed 2 major long-term retainer clients. One was a mid-size e-commerce brand scaling into wholesale. The other was a tech startup that had just closed a Series A and needed their entire content and paid acquisition strategy rebuilt from scratch. Both were paying me monthly. Both were growing. I'd brought on 2 contractors. I'd raised my rates twice. I was clearing more in a single month than I used to make in 4. I hadn't told the family any of this. Partly because I'm private. Partly because of that superstition. You don't announce a win before it's fully locked in, because the universe will hear you and decide to humble you. Partly because, if I'm being straight with myself, I didn't fully trust that the response would be what I needed it to be. So I'd been quiet. I drove to Thanksgiving in my new car. Nothing crazy. A clean used Audi A5, dark gray, leather interior, heated seats. I'd paid cash for it. That part still didn't feel real to me, if I'm honest. I sat in the parking lot of the dealership for like 10 minutes just staring at the receipt, turning it over in my hands. I pulled up to my mom's house and parked around the corner. I wasn't trying to make it a production. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought for my mom, walked in, hugged everybody, helped carry dishes to the table, spent 20 minutes talking to my Uncle Ray about his fantasy football team, even though I have never once cared about fantasy football. I was being normal. I was keeping it regular. Dinner started. Everything was fine. Until it wasn't. About 40 minutes into dinner, my cousin Jalen mentioned something about his 401k. He'd just started a new job that had matching contributions, and he was trying to figure out how aggressive to go with it. That opened the door to a whole investing conversation around the table. My Uncle Ray said he didn't trust the stock market, hadn't since 2008. My Auntie Bev said she and her husband had been putting money into a rental property down in Georgia. My cousin Tasha said she'd been doing a little bit with an index fund, but didn't really understand it yet. It was just normal dinner conversation, real stuff, the kind of talk that actually matters. And then somebody, I think it was Jalen, looked over at me and said, "What about you? You been doing anything with your money?" Completely innocent, just including me in the conversation. And before I could even open my mouth, Andre laughed. That laugh. The one I'd heard 100 times. The one that wasn't really a laugh. He leaned back in his chair, did that slow head tilt thing he does, got that half smirk going, and said, "Investing? Bro's still trying to figure out how to keep money." Completely innocent. Just including me in the conversation. And before I could even open my mouth, Andre laughed. That laugh. The one I'd heard 100 times. The one that wasn't really a laugh. He leaned back in his chair, did that slow head tilt thing he does, got that half smirk going and said, "Investing? Bro's still trying to figure out how to keep money." He said it easy, casual, like he was just stating a fact everybody already knew. And then he picked up his fork and kept eating, like what he just said was nothing. Like it was just brothers being brothers. The table got a little quieter. Not silent, but quieter. And my mom laughed. Short, light, airy, that specific laugh. And she shook her head slightly like these boys, and went back to her macaroni. And something in me just shifted. Not hot. Not explosive. Not table flipping. Something colder than that. Cleaner. Like a fog I'd been breathing for 3 years quietly lifted. And everything in that room came into sharp, clear focus. I looked at Andre. He was already moving on, talking to Jalen about something else, completely unbothered. The joke had landed. He'd gotten the laugh from my mom, and now it was filed away and forgotten. For him. I looked at my mom, still smiling, still passing dishes. And I thought about every Thanksgiving before this one. Every Christmas. Every 4th of July cookout. Every birthday dinner where I'd smiled through something I should have responded to. Every time I'd let it go because I was trying to be the bigger person, because I didn't want to blow up the evening, because I told myself it didn't matter. It did matter. It had always mattered. And I was done pretending it didn't. I made a decision right there. Not to perform anger. Not to make a scene. Not to embarrass anyone. Just to tell the truth. I set my fork down. I took a sip of water. And I said, quietly, calmly, looking straight at Andre, "Actually, I closed out this year at $240,000 in revenue. After expenses, I cleared about $160,000. I've maxed my Roth IRA 2 years running. I've got a brokerage account and an emergency fund that covers 14 months. And I paid for my car in cash. So yeah, I've been doing a little something with my money." And I picked my fork back up. Y'all, I need you to actually picture what happened to that room. It didn't explode. Nobody screamed. There was no dramatic moment where dishes went flying. It just stopped. Like someone hit a pause button on a remote that nobody knew existed. Jalen, mid-reach for the rolls, froze with his hand in the air. My Auntie Bev set her glass down so slowly and carefully it made no sound at all. My Uncle Ray, who had not been fully tracking this conversation, was suddenly, completely, tracking this conversation. I don't know what his instincts picked up, but his head turned and his eyes were sharp. Tasha looked at her plate, then looked up, then looked at Andre. And Andre, who always had something to say, who had a comeback for everything, who had been making this joke in various forms for 3 years without a single consequence. Andre's face went blank. Not processing blank. Not surprise blank. Blank blank. Like a computer handed a task it wasn't built to run. Like a man who stepped confidently off a curb and discovered the ground was a foot lower than he calculated. His mouth opened slightly. Nothing came out. And my mom was not laughing. She was looking at me with an expression I am still, weeks later, trying to fully decode. It wasn't pride exactly. It wasn't upset. It was something more complicated and more honest than either of those things. Like she was looking at her son and finding someone who had been standing right there the entire time, and she'd somehow been looking 2 feet to the left of him for 3 years without realizing it. The table held that silence. 5 seconds. 6. 7. And then Jalen, God bless Jalen, the man has always had timing, broke it. He pointed at me and said, "Yo, walk me through the brokerage situation. What are you actually buying?" And that was it. The seal broke. My Uncle Ray leaned forward. Tasha started asking questions. Even my Auntie Bev, who I don't think has ever asked me about my work in her life, wanted to know what a retainer client meant. And Andre sat there, quiet, eating his food. For the next hour, I had the most real conversation I'd had at a family dinner in years. Not a performance. Not a clapback victory lap. Just real talk. About how the business had grown. About how retainer structures work versus project-based work. About index funds and Roth IRAs and why I'd made the specific choices I'd made with my money after 2 years of having almost none of it. My Uncle Ray, the man who said he didn't trust the stock market since 2008, was taking notes on his phone. Not joking. Literally pulling up his notes app. Jalen and I exchanged numbers to keep the conversation going after dinner. And Andre was quiet through most of it. He contributed here and there, normal stuff, unrelated stuff. His voice was steady. He wasn't visibly rattled in any way you could point to, but the energy was completely different. Something that had been sitting on that table for 3 years, some running joke that had been passed around like a side dish at every family gathering, had been picked up and put away. And we both felt it. After dinner, my mom pulled me into the kitchen while I was helping wrap up leftovers. She waited until nobody else was in earshot. And then she said, real quiet, "Why didn't you tell me things had turned around like that?" I looked at her, and I said, "I did tell you things were going well, Mom. Every time you asked, you just kept asking if I was sure." She didn't say anything right away. She handed me a container to seal up. We finished wrapping the food without talking. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that means something is happening underneath it. The kind where words are being formed but aren't ready yet. I've had a few weeks now to sit with all of it. And I want to get honest with you for a minute because this story isn't really about money. The money was just the thing that was undeniable. Numbers are clean. You can't laugh off a number. You can't smirk at a number and keep eating. That's why I used them. Not to flex. Not to perform. But because I needed to say something in a language that couldn't be minimized or redirected or turned back into a joke. The real story is about something most of us know but don't always say out loud. The way the people closest to you can get locked into a version of who you are. A version that was accurate once during your hardest chapter and then just never got updated. I was the one who took a risk and struggled. That was my assigned role in the family story. And families, close ones especially, can get deeply attached to those roles. Not out of cruelty, most of the time. Not because they actually want you stuck. But because if you change, if you grow past the role, if you become something the story didn't account for, then everybody else has to update their understanding too. And that's uncomfortable. It takes effort. So it's easier to keep telling the old story. It's easier to keep laughing at the old joke. And I understand that. I genuinely do. I'm not sitting here acting like Andre is some villain because he isn't. He's my brother. He grew up in the same house I did, with the same pressures, the same expectations, the same family dynamics that shaped all of us in ways we're still figuring out. But understanding the psychology of it doesn't mean I'm required to keep absorbing it. That's the thing I got wrong for 3 years. Every time I let the comment slide, every time I smiled through it, every time I chose the peace over the truth, I was, without meaning to, confirming the story. I was telling Andre and my mom and everyone at that table. Yeah, the joke is accurate. Yeah, I'm still that guy. Yeah, you can keep laughing. The silence I created at that dinner table, that frozen, nobody moving, what just happened silence, that was the sound of a story being rewritten in real time.
And I needed it.
Even if it made dinner weird, even if my mom went quiet,
Even if it cost something.
the truth needed to be said at the table. Out loud. In front of everybody. For days after Thanksgiving, Andre called me. I looked at the phone for a second before I picked up. Not because I was being petty, I was genuinely trying to read what I had bandwidth for. Because conversations with Andre after moments like that can go a few different directions, and not all of them are productive. But I picked up. He said, "Yo." I said, "What's up?" There was a pause. Longer than normal. And then he said, that was a lot at dinner." I said, "Which part?" Another beat. He said, "Come on. You know which part." And then, slower. I wasn't trying to. I've been saying stuff like that for a minute. And I don't know, it just became a thing. I didn't think it bothered you like that. And look, that's not an apology. Not a clean one. There's no I'm sorry in it. But there's something real in it. There's acknowledgement. There's a guy trying to find the door to a room he'd never tried to enter before. So I met him there. I said, "It did bother me, Andre. For a long time. Not because of what you were saying about money, but because you kept saying it and Mom kept laughing and it felt like the whole family had just decided that was who I was. And nobody was checking whether it was still true." He was quiet. Then he said, "I think part of it was when you left and you said you were going to do the consulting thing, I genuinely thought you were making a mistake. Like a real one. And I think I never let go of that. And it just kept coming out sideways." Which, honestly, more self-awareness than I expected. For real. I said, "I hear that. But bro, you gotta let it go now. I need you to let it go." He said, "Yeah, you're right. I hear you." It wasn't a full reconciliation. It wasn't a movie ending. There's still work to do there, on both sides, honestly, because these things don't fix in one phone call. But it was something real. A door cracked open that had been sealed shut for 3 years. I'll take a cracked door. My mom calls me every Sunday. Has since I moved away. It's one of the things I love most about her. That consistency, that weekly check-in that says I'm still thinking about you even when neither of us has anything major to report. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, the calls started like always. "How are you? Did you eat? How's the weather out there?" And then she said, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be straight with me." I said, "Okay." She said, "Have I not been in your corner the way I should have been?" That question hit me different than I expected. Because my mom is not that kind of person. She doesn't go digging for hard answers. She's a keep the peace, let's not make it bigger than it is, we all love each other kind of woman. Has been her whole life. That's just how she moves. So the fact that she was asking directly, plainly, told me she'd been sitting with Thanksgiving all week. Really sitting with it. Turning it over. I took a breath. And I said, "There were moments, Mom, where I needed you to say something and you laughed instead. And Andre saying what he said that I can handle. That's Andre. But when you laughed, it felt like you thought he was right. Like even you had written the story on me." She went quiet. I heard her breathing. And then she said, "I didn't think he was right. I just didn't want it to turn into a thing between y'all." I said, "Mom, laughing at the joke is still a choice. Staying neutral isn't actually neutral. It just looks like neutral." More quiet. And then, softer than I'd ever heard her, she said, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry I made you feel like I wasn't writing for you.
Y'all.
I had to set the phone on my chest for a second. Not because it was dramatic. Just because it landed somewhere deep, somewhere that had been waiting a long time for exactly those words. And I needed a second to let it actually land instead of deflecting it like I deflected everything else for 3 years. That was all I'd needed. Not the silence at the dinner table. Not the numbers. Not the car or the contracts or any of it. Just my mom saying she was in my corner. Let me be straight with you before I close this out. This is not a money story. I know it sounds like one. I know I dropped numbers at a dinner table and the room froze, and that's the most memorable part of the whole thing. But the numbers were just the tool. The most undeniable tool I had available. You can argue with feelings. You can dismiss feelings. You can tell someone they're being sensitive, being dramatic, reading into things that weren't there. You cannot argue with a number. So, I used numbers. Not to impress anybody. Not to make Andre feel small. But because I needed something concrete enough that it couldn't be laughed off, couldn't be redirected, couldn't be folded back into the joke. But underneath the numbers is the thing that actually matters. What do you do when the people who love you are running an outdated version of your story? Because it's going to happen. If you've ever taken a path that didn't make sense to the people around you, if you've ever bet on yourself when nobody else would, you already know this feeling. The people closest to you saw you struggle. They were there for the hard chapters. And because they love you in their own complicated, imperfect way, those hard chapters got burned into their understanding of who you are. And then you grew.
You built something.
You changed. But the people who love you, they're still running the old file. Still seeing the version of you from chapter 4, even though you're deep into chapter 11. You can either wait for them to catch up on their own, or you can say something. For 3 years I waited. I swallowed comments. I smiled through jokes. I let it go, let it go, let it go, every single time, at every single gathering, and told myself the patience was dignity. But it wasn't dignity. It was me agreeing with a story that wasn't mine. Every time I let the joke land without pushing back, I was confirming it. I was telling my brother and my mom and everyone at the table, yeah, that's still accurate. Yeah, you've got me figured out. Yeah, you can keep laughing. The day I put my fork down, calm, no theatrics, no performance, everything changed. Not just in the room. In me. Something I'd been carrying for 3 years, this low-grade, constant weight of being underestimated by the people who were supposed to know me best, just lifted.
Clean off.
I stopped bracing for the next comment. Stopped dreading the next holiday. Stopped walking into my mom's house feeling like I had to prove something to people who'd already made up their minds. I walked in as myself. Fully. For the first time in a long time. And that is worth more than any number I put on that table. So here's who this is for. If you're the one in your family who took the road that didn't make sense to anybody else, this is for you. If you're grinding in a city by yourself, building something that doesn't have a title anybody recognizes, and the people back home are still holding on to the hardest version of your story, this is for you. If you've been eating comments at holiday dinners, smiling through jokes that have teeth in them, telling yourself it's not worth the argument, this is for you. You don't owe anyone a performance. You don't have to announce yourself before you're ready. You don't have to prove a single thing until you feel like it. But when the moment comes, and it will come, when someone hands you the opening without even knowing they're doing it, put the fork down, take a sip of water, and tell your truth. Steady. Quiet.
Clear.
Because the silence you create is completely different from the silence you've been living in. And trust me on this, that room will remember it.